The glossy program felt cheap in my hands. My name was in bold, Leo Vance, CEO of ForgePoint Dynamics, but I was staring at the line beneath it. Introduction by Mr. Arthur Kendrick. Kendrick. The name tasted like ash. 26 years vanished, and I was 17 again in his cramped office, the air thick with stale coffee and shattered ambition. He'd slid my transcript across the desk, a dismissive flick of his wrist. Leo. He'd sighed, his voice full of pity. Let's be realistic. Some people just aren't college material. Now I watched from the wings as he tapped the microphone. The man who tried to bury my future was about to introduce me as his university's keynote speaker. Kendrick looked smaller on stage. Time had stooped his shoulders and thinned the silver hair he used to comb with such smug precision. The booming voice that had sealed my fate was now a reedy tremor against the microphone as he fumbled with a note card. My bio. The summary of a life he'd declared impossible before it even began. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, picturing a surge of fiery vindication. Instead, I felt a cold, calm certainty. He wasn't a villain anymore. He was a footnote. He'd given me my first real lesson. The world is full of people who will draw a box around you and tell you to stay inside. He just never imagined I'd use his blueprint to build an empire. My company, ForgePoint Dynamics, was built on that defiance. Every automated system we designed, every patent we filed from our Pittsburgh headquarters, was a brick in a wall he couldn't see. He was about to list my accomplishments without understanding he was the architect of my ambition. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing. "Good evening," he began, his eyes scanning the crowd, deliberately avoiding the wings. "It is my distinct honor." His voice, thin as it was, dragged me back through time, back to that office, surrounded by framed degrees from universities he probably herded his own children towards. My file was open on his desk, but he never looked at it. He was looking at my hands. They were calloused, with grease permanently etched into the lines of my knuckles from rebuilding a car engine with my dad. In his eyes, that was a life sentence. "I see your grades in shop are excellent," he'd said, as if praising a dog for a simple trick. "But your calculus, your literature, Leo, a university looks for a well-rounded student." I'd tried to explain, "Sir, I'm not trying to be a poet, I want to build things. I have notebooks full of designs for robotic arms, automated sorters. I know the math when I can see it, when I can apply it." He'd given me a tired, paternal smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of a man who had already made his decision. "Ambition is a fine thing, son, but it has to be grounded in reality." He leaned forward, the cheap polyester of his tie straining. "Your father is a mechanic, a good one. There's no shame in that trade. It's honorable work. People will always need their cars fixed." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "And that's all you'll ever be." He closed my file. A final, soft thud. "I've taken the liberty of putting together some brochures for local trade schools. They have excellent welding and machining programs. A young man with your aptitude could do very well." He slid the glossy pamphlets across the desk. They felt like a consolation prize for a race I wasn't allowed to run. I didn't take them. I just stood up, the heat of shame crawling up my neck. I remember walking out of that school into a cold, drizzling Pittsburgh afternoon. Every door I'd ever imagined walking through had been slammed shut and locked from the inside. I walked for hours, past the steel mills breathing fire into the gray sky, past the row houses tucked into the hills. He was right about one thing. I was my father's son. I had his hands, but he'd missed the most important part. I had my mother's stubborn heart. By the time I got home, soaked and shivering, the despair had cooled into something hard and sharp, a gear tooth clicking into place. Fine. I wasn't college material. I wouldn't follow their path. I'd build my own. I would create a place where the people who build things, the ones with grease on their hands and blueprints in their heads, were the ones in charge. He drew me a map to a trade school. I used it to plan a revolution. That revolution began quietly. I enrolled in community college for an associate's degree in mechanical engineering, a path Kendrick would have seen as a consolation prize. I worked full-time at a machine shop, the same kind of honorable work he'd praised. During the day, I learned the physical limits of steel and aluminum. At night, I learned the theory that governed them. I was living in both worlds, and I could see the disconnect, the massive gap between the engineers in the clean rooms and the machinists on the dirty floor. The memory of Kendrick's words became a filter. Every time a professor dismissed a practical question, I heard his voice. Every time a manager ignored a suggestion for improvement, I saw his tired, paternal smile. They were all drawing the same box, just with different materials. They believed the people who design and the people who build should be kept separate. I knew that was the single biggest flaw in modern industry. My first major design was born from that frustration. The plant I worked at used a sorting system that was archaic and dangerous. I spent 6 months of late nights in my dad's garage, fueled by cheap coffee and pure spite, designing an automated optical sorter. I used what I had: salvaged servos, a cheap camera, and an old desktop computer. It was ugly, but it was brilliant. I showed the schematics to my shift foreman. He glanced at them for 10 seconds. "We're not an R&D lab, Leo. Get back to your station." That was the final push. I quit the next day. I took the prototype to a small, independent metal fabrication shop. The owner, a grizzled old man named Sal, looked more at my calloused hands than at the machine. He listened for an hour, asked 3 sharp questions, and then pointed to a corner of his shop floor. "You get it running in a week, I'll give you 5% of whatever it saves me. Deal?" That was the deal that launched ForgePoint Dynamics. Sal's 5% was more than my annual salary. We refined the sorter, and he introduced me to 2 more shop owners. My trade school network, the one Kendrick never imagined, became my first client base. They weren't looking for a college pedigree. They were looking for solutions from someone who understood the problem because he'd lived it. On stage, Kendrick adjusts his glasses, his voice gaining a hollow, practiced confidence as he reads from the card. Mr. Vance's company, ForgePoint Dynamics, is now a global leader, revolutionizing supply chains from Pittsburgh to Singapore. He says revolutionizing, the word I'd whispered to myself in the rain 26 years ago. He's reading my life story back to me, but all he sees are the headlines. He doesn't see the years I paid my 2 employees out of my own pocket, living on ramen so they could feed their families. He doesn't see the loan denials, the condescending smirks from bankers who saw my dirty fingernails and dismissed my business plan without reading past the first page. He's describing a skyscraper, oblivious to the fact that he's the man who told me the ground I was standing on was unfit for a foundation. He just told me to find a trade. He never guessed I would trade up. He finished with a flourish, the practiced cadence of a man who had delivered thousands of such introductions. A true titan of industry, and a testament to what can be achieved with vision and hard work. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Leo Vance. The applause was a sudden wave, a physical force that washed over the stage. I walked from the wings into the blinding white light, my shadow long and sharp behind me. Every step was deliberate, measured. The sound of my leather shoes on the polished floor was the only thing I could hear, a slow, steady rhythm counting down 26 years. I wasn't walking toward a podium. I was walking toward a ghost. Kendrick turned, his face arranged into a mask of professional warmth, but his eyes were wide with a kind of nervous awe. The smile was brittle. He extended a soft, dry hand. When I took it, my own hand, still carrying the memory of steel and grease in its grip, felt like a piece of machinery. His fingers were frail, the bones like twigs wrapped in paper. For a single, stretched second, his eyes met mine. There was no recognition of the boy he'd dismissed. Just the anxious deference of an employee greeting the man who signs the checks. He was a functionary, a cog in a machine I had built. He leaned in, the scent of mints and old paper clinging to him. "Congratulations, Leo," he whispered, the name a strange, unfamiliar thing on his lips. Truly remarkable. The roar of the crowd was a distant ocean. I held his gaze, my grip firm but not crushing. It was a simple statement of fact. I am here. You are here. This is the reality you said was impossible. I had spent years imagining this moment would taste like fire and victory. It didn't. It tasted of nothing at all. It was just quiet. I leaned in, my voice low and calm, meant only for him. "Thank you, Arthur." I let his first name hang in the air for a beat, a small, sharp object. "You were right about one thing. It's honorable work." A flicker of confusion crossed his face, a slight furrow in his brow. The words were a key turning in a lock he'd long since forgotten. He didn't understand. He didn't have to. The look was enough. It was the fleeting, bewildered expression of a man realizing he's been speaking a language he never truly comprehended. I released his hand. He seemed to shrink, pulling back toward the edge of the stage, as if an invisible current were pulling him away into obscurity. I turned to the podium, placing my hands on the cool wood. The warmth of the lights felt like a forge. I looked out at the sea of faces. Students, faculty, donors. They were all looking at the man from the program, the CEO, the success story. They saw the destination. But for the first time, I wasn't thinking about the man who told me no. I was thinking about all the students out there, right now, in cramped offices, just like his, being told the same thing. I let the applause die down, the silence in the auditorium growing heavy with expectation. I smiled, a calm, easy smile that I'd practiced in boardrooms for 2 decades. "Thank you, Dean Michaels, and thank you to the board. It's an honor to be back in Pittsburgh and to be here at your esteemed university." I started conventionally, delivering the first 5 minutes of the speech my PR team had written. I talked about 4th-generation automation, the future of logistics, the importance of innovation. I could see Kendrick in the wings, partially obscured by a curtain. His posture had relaxed. The brittle smile was gone, replaced by a look of weary relief. He thought the danger had passed. He thought my cryptic remark was the beginning and end of it. He thought this was just another keynote. He was wrong. "But innovation doesn't start in a boardroom," I said, my voice shifting, dropping the practiced corporate cadence and finding a lower, more personal tone. The shift was subtle, but it was enough. A few hundred heads in the audience tilted. It doesn't start with a business plan or a market analysis. It starts with a problem. It starts in a garage or a basement or a workshop. It starts with a kid who looks at a machine and knows, instinctively, that it can be better. I paused, letting my eyes sweep the room, over the students in the front and the wealthy donors in the back. It starts with the people who have a gift for seeing the world, not just as it is, but as it could be. The ones who can think in 3 dimensions. The ones with grease under their fingernails. The ones who might not write a perfect essay on Shakespeare, but who can machine a gear to 1/1000th of an inch. Our society has a name for these people, I said, my voice hardening slightly. We call them not college material. A nervous murmur rippled through the auditorium. In the wings, I saw Kendrick go perfectly still. "We are told there is one path to success," I continued, my hands gripping the sides of the podium. "A 4-year degree, a well-rounded education. We are told to fit inside a box, and anyone who doesn't fit, the brilliant mechanic, the visionary welder, the self-taught coder, is handed a brochure for a trade school as a consolation prize. They are told their work is honorable, a word used to pat them on the head while another door is quietly closed and locked." Kendrick's face, pale under the stage lights, was a mask of dawning horror. He was finally hearing it. The echo of his own words, weaponized and fired back at him in a hall filled with his colleagues and employers. ForgePoint Dynamics was built by those people. It was built on the belief that the person on the factory floor often knows more about a problem than the engineer in the corner office. We didn't succeed in spite of our backgrounds, we succeeded because of them. And so, tonight, I'm not here to talk about my company's past. I'm here to announce its future. I looked directly at the university president in the front row. He was leaning forward, his eyes wide. Effective tonight, ForgePoint Dynamics is endowing a new perpetual scholarship and grant program at this university. We are committing an initial $10 million. The room exploded. The applause was deafening, a physical shockwave. The president was on his feet, clapping enthusiastically. I saw Kendrick flinch, as if the sound were painful. I held up a hand, and the noise gradually subsided. "But this program," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "will be different. It will not be for the students with 4.0 GPAs. It will not be decided by SAT scores or eloquent application essays. I picked up a note card from the podium as if reading prepared notes, though the words were etched into my memory. The ForgePoint Applied Ambition Grant is for the student who aced physics but failed calculus because they couldn't see the application. It's for the student with a portfolio of CAD designs instead of a list of extracurriculars. It's for the ones who have been told, at some point in their life, let's be realistic. I let the last 3 words hang in the air. This was it. The checkmate. This grant won't just pay for tuition. It will provide seed funding for projects. It will build a state-of-the-art workshop on campus, open 24/7. It will fund apprenticeships that pay, not just offer credit. It will find the students this system overlooks and give them the one thing they've been denied: resources. The applause started again, even more fervent this time. They saw a visionary philanthropist, a hometown hero giving back. They had no idea they were cheering for a 26-year-old act of revenge. Of course, I said, silencing the crowd once more, a program this unconventional requires unconventional oversight. It cannot be run by a traditional academic committee. It needs to be guided by people who understand its mission in their bones. I looked past the lights, directly at the shadow in the wings. That's why a condition of our $10 million endowment is the formation of a new, independent selection board. This board will not be comprised of faculty. It will be comprised of shop foremen, master machinists, and industrial designers from across Pennsylvania. The real-world experts. They will choose the recipients. They will mentor them. They will decide where the money goes. This was the blade, sliding in silently. I had just stripped the university's academic advisors, Kendrick's entire department, of any power over my money. I had built a new system right in the heart of the old one and made them powerless to stop it. Then I twisted it. Naturally, a board of external professionals will need an internal university liaison, I said, my tone becoming purely administrative. Someone to handle the logistics, to book their meeting rooms, prepare their paperwork, and take the minutes. A purely functional role. The president and I agree that this position is vital for smooth operation. I paused, letting the silence stretch, a string pulled taut. I could feel every eye in the room on me. Kendrick was frozen, a statue carved from dread. He finally understood. He wasn't just a footnote, he was the final exhibit. I turned my head slowly, my gaze, pinning him in the spotlight of my gaze. And after a productive discussion with the dean, we have selected the perfect candidate to fill that role. A man with decades of experience in guiding students toward their appropriate vocations. I let the words land, each one a hammer blow on a rivet, sealing him in place. Please join me in congratulating your university's new liaison for the ForgePoint grant, Mr. Arthur Kendrick. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the hum of the lights and the sound of 1,000 people holding their breath. Then the applause erupted, louder than before. It was a roar of approval for my generosity, my perceived wisdom in selecting a seasoned veteran for the role. They were applauding a man being sentenced. Kendrick didn't move. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, translucent mask. His mouth was slightly open, as if he'd tried to form a word but had forgotten how. He was looking at me, but his eyes were unfocused, seeing a ghost from 26 years ago finally step out of the shadows. He saw the trap, fully assembled around him. He couldn't refuse. It would be professional suicide, an insult to the university's largest new benefactor. He couldn't accept without acknowledging his utter, complete defeat. He was neutered. A gatekeeper whose only job was now to hold the gate open for everyone he had once turned away. I had imagined feeling a hot surge of triumph. Instead, it was like the quiet, satisfying click of a well-machined lock. It wasn't passion, it was precision. I hadn't destroyed him. I had repurposed him. He would spend the remainder of his career taking minutes for the kind of men he'd dismissed his entire life. He would file paperwork for the success of students he would have deemed not college material. He would be the administrative assistant to my revolution. I gave the crowd a final, confident smile. Thank you. Let's build the future together. The standing ovation was immediate. I stepped back from the podium as the university president, Dean Michaels, rushed onto the stage, his hand outstretched, his face beaming. "Leo, that was magnificent," he boomed, his grip firm. "Simply breathtaking. And your choice for liaison. Brilliant. Arthur's been with us forever. He knows the system inside and out. He'll be perfect for handling the logistics." The condescension in his tone was unintentional, but perfect. He saw Kendrick exactly as I now intended him to be seen, a functionary. A piece of administrative furniture. "I'm glad you agree, Dean," I said. My voice calm and professional. "My team will be in touch tomorrow to finalize the terms. We'll need Mr. Kendrick to prepare a report on potential workshop locations by the end of the week." I had just given him his first assignment. I turned and walked toward the wings, the applause still thundering behind me. Kendrick was still there, rooted to the spot, a statue in a cheap suit. As I approached, he seemed to shrink, his shoulders caving in. He wouldn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the polished floor, as if it were an abyss that was about to swallow him whole. I could have said something. A final, cutting remark. "Let's be realistic, Arthur." Or, "There's no shame in honorable work." But the silence was more powerful. Vengeance, I realized, wasn't a loud explosion. It was the quiet, irreversible changing of a power dynamic. It was watching a man drown in the consequences of a decision he barely remembered making. I walked past him, without a word, without a glance. He was no longer a person to me. He was a problem I had solved. As I stepped off the stage and into the sudden quiet of the backstage corridor, I felt the last 26 years settle. The anger that had fueled me for so long wasn't gone, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a fire in my gut, it was a foundation. A cold, solid, unshakable thing I had built my life upon. He hadn't just drawn me a map to a trade school. He had given me a blueprint for justice. And tonight, I had finally finished the build. The reception was a blur of champagne flutes and beaming faces. Donors, trustees, the dean. They all wanted to shake the hand that had just signed a $10 million check. I moved through them with practiced ease, my smile a well-worn mask. They lauded my generosity, my business acumen. Not one of them understood they had witnessed an execution. They were celebrating the weapon, oblivious to the wound. I found a quiet corner by a window overlooking the campus quad. The applause was a memory. The victory felt sterile, colder than I'd imagined. "Mr. Vance?" I turned. A young woman in a university staff polo shirt stood there, holding a tray of empty glasses. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her hands were clean, but her fingernails were short, practical, with a faint, dark line of what looked like grease etched deep under one of them. I just wanted to say, "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She wasn't looking at me like a donor. She was looking at me like an equal. "What you said up there, about people who build things, about being told to be realistic." She hesitated, then pushed on, her words a quiet rush. "I'm in the engineering program. I'm trying to build a new kind of hydraulic press in my uncle's garage. My academic advisor told me to focus on my grades if I want to get a good job." Her eyes held mine, and in them I saw the reflection of a 17-year-old boy standing in the rain. She wasn't asking for anything, she was bearing witness. "He doesn't get it," she said simply. "But you do." That was it. That was the moment the cold, sterile feeling vanished, replaced by a deep, resonant warmth. It was never about Arthur Kendrick. He was just the first brick in a wall I had to tear down. The real victory wasn't his humiliation. It was seeing her, ready to climb. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice softer than it had been all night. "Sarah," she replied. "Send my office your schematics for that press, Sarah," I said. "The first Forge Point grant is waiting for you." Her face lit up with a sudden, brilliant hope that was worth more than any revenge I had ever imagined. I watched her walk away, and for the first time that night I felt the true weight of what I had done. I hadn't just settled a score, I had changed the rules of the game. Who was the one teacher, counselor, or authority figure who told you that you couldn't do something? And what's the story of how you proved them wrong?